Welcome to F1 or F Off, your audio pit stop for F1 news, interviews, and race reviews. I'm one half of your host, Idris. I'm the top half.
And I am the other half. That is the lukewarm, fatty center of the podcast that is F1 or F Off.
So I was going for
Let's go with it.
Have you've watched BoJack Horseman, right?
No.
No? Oh, okay. Gabe, you would really like BoJack Horseman. It's great. It's a great show that really kind of delves into the psyche of a anthropomorphic horseman named BoJack.
Okay.
And it's just like he used to be like a big celebrity because he was a star on a TV show back in the 90s. It was a sitcom, kind of like Full House, whatnot. Think Danny Tanner.
Okay.
Bob Saget, R.I.P.
Mm-hmm.
But then his life after the show ends, right? And like about his connections in Hollywood and what fame has done to him, all that kind of stuff. You'd love it.
Yeah.
But anyways, there's a character in the show, Princess Caroline, and she has a boyfriend who is clearly like three boys who are standing on top of one another's shoulders in a trench coat, right?
Awesome.
and like every time you watch it, you're like, these are clearly children. Like, have you never opened up his trench coat? But that's kind of like the joke of the show, right?
That's awesome.
But yeah, that's what I was going for. That I was like, since you're so strong and lumber sexual,
okay.
you got the nice you got a nice build, you can support me.
I'm still the soft, gooey core. Then, it's that my statement still stands.
You say gooey core, and I think of like the Stay Puft Marshmallow dude. Like
sort of like that,
kind of melting. Yeah.
Yeah, just sort of. I'm just sort of like I'm a softy. I'm a soft boy.
Okay.
But yeah, no, I'm totally cool. I lift you up so you can stand on mountains. Yeah, that's me doing that. That's me lifting you up as we like to lift up everybody in this space that we enjoy.
Yes.
And do really good things. And I'll just take one quick moment to say RIP to the DRS podcast.
Absolutely,
it was a great run, and we made a lot of memories, made some friends with it, and we are grateful. But good thing is that there's still lots of different F1 podcasts at your disposal, mainly us. So we are still here. We're still kicking, and we will do our best to continue to bring the content that you listeners expect and ask for and require of us every week.
Yeah. Or as some friends of ours would like to say, we continue to make hot jams for the people to dance to.
That's right.
So we've got a banger of an episode today, y'all. We've been teasing some of our data analysis. Just Gabe and I, we're data nerds. We like looking at data and just going, whoa. But also, this has been a very spicy week with news, as I'm sure most of you are familiar with. So we got a lot to talk about. And
Yeah, please tell me what is happening here. What happened with this whole FIA saga? Because I've tried to figure it out so many times, and I still don't understand exactly what went down. I don't know what was being talked, what was being transferred, what info was being passed. Like, was it I know it was some weird publication or media outlet for Formula One that just came up with it on the fly, and they're just speculating about what Toto and Susie's pillow talk is like.
Yeah,
is that what's happening here?
It's what it kind of feels like, right? So let me set the stage. First off, there has been a big investigation that the FIA said they were going to open up into the Wolves. Who are the Wolves? For those that are uninitiated, you have Toto Wolff, who is the CEO and team principal of Mercedes-AMG Petronas F1 racing team. And then you have Susie Wolff, who is the director of F1 Academy. She has also been involved in the world of motorsports for a very long time, being a racer herself. So she's a very, very accomplished individual when it comes to the world of motorsports and is highly respected. So one thing that we're going to talk about with the context of these stories today, revolves around something called conflict of interest, right? So conflict of interest can be a very fickle, finicky beast, right? Because what a conflict of interest could be is you have someone who is in a position where they are privy to information that others are not privy to, but they are also in a position where they can take action on that information and benefit in some kind of way. That's whether it's financial, societal, whatever it is, right?
If you're a judge at the local cookie judging contest and your grandmother shows up with cookies, that could be a conflict of interest because you could potentially cast your vote for your grandmother because she's your grandmother and not because her cookies are good.
Right. But we all know her cookies are bomb. Like those snickerdoodles she brings every time.
Yeah, but
great.
if she's just like, you know what, I'll give you an extra money for Christmas if you vote for yes for me. Like that's like corruption 101. Basically.
Right. Exactly. So yeah, that's what conflict of interest is, or that at least that's my take on explaining it, right? So this whole thing with the FIA started out because a publication called, I don't even know if I want to name them because this just seems wild, but I think I have to so people can look into it themselves. Business F1, right? They are a publication that has stated the following previously. Number one, that Lewis Hamilton plays the race card a lot, right? For those that are unfamiliar, I don't know how at this point you don't know this, but for those that are familiar, Lewis Hamilton is a mixed race individual, half black, half white, right? In that he always plays the race card when talking about things. Like ridiculous, outlandish. Number two, that there are 3 gay drivers on the grid currently, right? First off, it's no one's business. Who cares? Like secondly, why is this
what does it matter?
Who cares? Like, oh my God.
What is this relevant to? Like,
right.
Like, it's just like when you had that friend who's like, oh, well, I heard that he really likes Nickelback. And it's just like,
yeah.
Okay, so what are you saying about, like, we're evaluating him for a job? Like, what does that mean? Well, you know. It's like, no, I don't know. What does it mean? It's just that, what does it matter? It doesn't matter.
And here's I guess the best one. This publication has also stated something along the lines of female racers in the W series. That's the all-female racing series that used to exist, was a predecessor to F1 Academy. So they might have meant this about both W series and F1 Academy. But that the drivers would have been more successful if they wore bikinis and had more sex appeal.
God.
This is exactly why diversity and inclusion initiatives and equity initiatives exist, to combat this kind of mindset. Because honestly, this kind of mentality and like the things that have been said here are not one-offs. People believe this stuff through and through, right?
Yeah.
So it's really important to always have initiatives and just to show we are taking a stand against this. Even if it is just like a paper thing, you can at least hold people accountable to that and say, look, like your own contracts say that you will not do this kind of thing. Therefore, I'm holding you accountable towards that. You know what I mean?
Right.
Just ridiculous, right? So this organization, whatever you want to call them, comes out and says that there is that there might be a potential conflict of interest within the F1 world, right? And FIA, they have to take these things seriously, right? So what do? They look into it and they see that the people who are named about it, it's Susie Wolf and Toto Wolff, right? The 2 that I mentioned previously. Now, let's take a step back away from this as far as this whole scenario is concerned, right? Conflict of interest it's there, right? I mean, it's there's a potential that it could happen where like a divulging of information that shouldn't be divulged gets passed along one way. Now, whether or not Susie or Toto in either scenario can actually reap benefits from the information that might be shared between them, that's one thing. But you would assume that they're probably, professionals in every sense of the word, and they don't just sit down around dinner, breakfast, and just talk shop all the time, or talk shop in the way that would open them up to liability, that kind of thing, right? Like, I think those 2 of all people would probably know that we are probably being heavily scrutinized. We're probably under surveillance, not like NSA spying on them, but like people pay more attention to the things they say and do because they are a married couple, because of the positions they have. You know what I mean? So I'm sure they're very careful about. I would hope that they're very careful about the types of things that they talk about. You know, just because of that, like the optics, right? So from in one sense, yeah, I guess that that conflict does exist. But the way it was portrayed, it just kind of seemed like this publication was dragging Susie's name through the mud in a way that was kind of like talking. It kind of felt like, oh, well, I wonder how she got her position and the work that she does. Like, ooh, is she just sleeping her way up to the top? You know, that kind of thing, right? And it feels really gross.
Horrendous.
Yeah, and it's like really sad because this just shows like it doesn't matter like if you are from a group that is typically not represented in any kind of industry, whatever it is, right? It feels like you have to work twice, if not 3 times as hard to make it to that position of power, of influence. And then you can lose it all so easily because of just, an investigation into you because optics or whatever it might be. And your reputation takes a big ding from that. And it can be really hard to rebuild that, right? So I'm sure in some capacity, Susie has probably had some kind of reputation dinged to her because now there's a little bit of tarnish on her name from this, right? Now, the reason we're talking about this is because this has just been a wild week as far as all the news all the water drops that just keep leaking from this pipe that's just ready to burst, right? So the FIA says that they're going to start investigating this, right? Which the FIA is allowed to, right? Like, in my opinion, what they really should have done is probably not say anything about it at all and just do a background investigation or do an investigation behind the scenes, right? Don't announce this, you know what I mean? Like, that just looks bad because then it looks like you have kind of like an agenda and you're kind of like, what am I looking for? You're on a crusade, right, to punish 1 or 2 individuals in particular. Right. So what happens from there? The FIA says that they're going to start investigating, and then Susie Wolf posts something on Instagram and Twitter, and then Toto posts something, and then Mercedes posts something, and everyone's just like, we're in shock. I don't know where this is coming from. Susie's all like, this feels highly misogynistic, and I feel like I'm being targeted here because I've never once had anything like this happen in my career, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Having to defend herself from internet trolls, all that kind of stuff, right? That kind of stuff comes with the territory, unfortunately. And what ends up happening is all the other teams come out the next day, and they all start tweeting out and posting on Instagram like boilerplate text that all says the same thing, saying that we were not the individual who spoke to this publication about any information that was divulged, and we've never experienced that, right? Every single team of the 10 teams on the grid, right, minus Mercedes, because Mercedes, I mean, they're saying, they're like, we don't know anything about this. Yeah. So the other 9 teams, they all come out with the exact same boilerplate text saying that they don't know who informed this, because what the allegations insinuate from the article is that there was a team principal on the grid who was in one of the team principal meetings, and Toto mentioned something that seemed to be out of left field, and their assumption was that, he could only have this information if it were coming from the Liberty Media side. That's the FOM, Formula One Management Team, right? So when you hear Liberty Media, FOM, Formula One Management, that's the same entity effectively. FIA is the sports rule governing body. That's a little separate. Who's run by MBS. Not Saudi Arabia MBS. That's a different MBS. I feel like I always have to like clarify that and specify that. Yeah. So all these teams are saying, no, I wasn't one of the team principals who said anything, and so all the other teams didn't say that or said the same thing, and they all felt the same. And then literally, I think the day after, there was a post from the FIA saying that they have ceased their investigation and they're not looking into any further. Holy shit. And on top of that, and this is the last thing I'll say, Susie then puts out an Instagram post saying, I was very confused because effectively that message to me meant, oh, that's it, I guess, right? Something along those lines. What a mess. What a mess. So yeah,
I mean, honestly, like an investigation would imply that there is some sort of evidence that suggests like that there is something nefarious happening. But like, I don't understand what this has to do with Susie Wolf. I don't understand what this has to do with F1 Academy.
Hmm.
You know, if they were, you know, if it was like Spygate, you know, where
Sure.
like Susie was the intermediary between getting, you know, data from Red Bull and selling it to Mercedes or something, and then Toto and her were getting a profit or something like that.
Hmm.
Like then it's like, oh, okay, that sounds pretty corrupt, and we need to figure. But like, I still don't understand like what was insinuated. Like, what information could they get from Liberty Media that would be a benefit to them over the other teams? Like,
Hmm.
it's not like the Liberty Media has technical data. It's not like, you
True.
know, like I don't know. Like, that's where I'm confused by this. It's like that's what I
Well,
don't understand. What the like what's the meat in this potato?
mm,
You know, like
I think one of the issues that could arise is that you have information, financial information from Liberty Media slash FOM that the FIA doesn't have, right? So that would be like the team principals, right? Because they could potentially use that financial information to negotiate better contracts and saying like, oh well, this much money should be allocated towards teams, that sort of
mm,
thing. That's what I'm assuming, right? I'm not a lawyer, so I'm just reading this off of Instagram and Reddit and putting things together on Twitter. I'm sorry, X, but
X. Yeah.
yeah, that's I think it has to do with the possibility that rule changes are coming down. Um, it has to come down to finances. I think that's the biggest thing because
Well,
people
speaking
don't
of
like their money being messed with.
No, no. And speaking of rule changes, I think we should mention the new thing that the FIA has done, where they formalized the ban on aero testing for the 2026 car until January 1st of 25,
Yep, that's a big one.
which is similar to what they did for 2022 when they did this big regulation change.
Hmm.
And the idea is that, you know, obviously, if you're a company like Mercedes or Ferrari or even Red Bull, you have enough money that you could develop a car years ahead of time. Whereas an
Oh
outfit
yeah,
like Haas or, you know, Sauber, they probably don't have enough money to fund their own cars every year, you know,
yeah,
let alone be able to like, you know, plan all the funding for a car 2 years from now. So the idea is to try and, you know, get a chance to sort of continue to try and level the playing field
absolutely.
as much as possible. But yeah, you know, I think like a ban on testing is one thing, but like, you know, I think development and sort of like blueprinting is another.
Yeah,
So, you know, I think that you still get the teams who they know what they're doing, they've done it for a while, are still going to be able to sort of eke out ahead because they're going to get that opportunity to be able to, you know, figure out what's going to be happening. But you
right.
know, they're trying something, and you know, I still think there was, you know, somebody had said they, you know, we are talking about the loopholes and the arrow, that you know, the decrease in the increase in dirty air following, and you know, it was this problem that, you know, people were hoping, like everyone was hoping that they were going to be able to do a little, you know, put some rules in or make some changes on the fly to
Hmm.
try and bring that down. But apparently, they're not going to touch it. They're just going to let it do whatever it's going to do. So I'm curious to see how that's going to end up changing starting next year.
Yeah,
Because if that's the case, it's definitely a potential that Red Bull will just continue to walk away with things
yeah,
as is.
yeah.
So
Yeah, and this is
um,
good, right? Because on like real talk, if we're really in this era of trying to achieve parity in the sport, which we have already made the first step of cost cap, right? You
mm,
need to also draw the line in the sand for other things, right? Technology development being the other part of that, because that without that, you don't know what these teams are doing behind the scenes,
yeah,
and not everyone's going to do it above board. I think everyone will say that they're doing it above board, but I'm sure there are elements that exist within the mind, and you can take action on it, or you can say, okay, we'll bin that under concepts for next year, and so who's
right,
following that to the T versus who's not, right?
right, yeah. I'm excited to see it. Um, I guess in other news, a few things that I've seen, at least related to next year's cars. Apparently, Hamilton is pretty impressed with what he's seeing from the Mercedes in the
Love
wind
it.
tunnel, which I like to see it. I mean, he's the one
Mm-hmm.
to know. You know what I mean? Obviously, like they did a lot of changes because their zero side pod thing. I mean, what that was a season and not even a half, like
Season,
a
yeah,
season and a quarter, and
yeah.
then they're just like, nope, this isn't gonna work. We're gonna, I'm still like, I part of me wonders what their 2023 season would have been like had they like not done the side
Oh yeah,
pod design
absolutely.
like for that, if they had started the season with like more traditional side pods. So
Hmm.
um that is remains to be seen, but yeah, I bet you they're not doing the zero side pod, because I think if they did, Lewis Hamilton probably would have been like very disappointed at the Arrow
Hmm.
results from the W15. So
Yeah.
um and also, this is really interesting news. I saw this. Apparently Danny Ricardo, I guess his development through AlphaTauri, even in the little bit of time that he was in there, was really huge for the team, data and development wise. And apparently, with their name change and the change of management, he's claiming that they're no longer a Red Bull Junior team. Which, take that with whatever
Hmm.
amount of grain of salt that you will, because I feel like it would be like if there was a baseball team comprised of like minor league players who were like in New York, and they're like, no, we're not, we're our own team, guys. Okay,
Hmm.
we're called the New York Spankies, and we're our own team. It's like, come on, your team is called Racing Bulls. All right,
Yeah.
like, let's, I hope you can, it's like all the speed and all the luck to you. If you
Yeah.
think that like you can just jump in, you're going to compete for points and everything, and you're gonna push Red Bull's nose in it, then you know what? I'll go for it, man. Like,
Yeah.
go for it. But like, I can't help but feel like Red Bull still has some sort of stake in the AlphaTauri team. I
Yeah.
mean, they're still be able to. They can still just pull drivers willy nilly out from them in and out. So
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
really know exactly what that means.
Yeah. I can't imagine. I can't imagine that the structure, the junior team like association and like that structure between the two, between Red Bull and Racing Bulls, is gonna be gone. No way. Like that.
No, I
It,
don't think. Yeah, I don't think it's
it'd
gonna
be
go.
foolish to do that. Like ideal world, you have a junior team on the grid that you can test people out, right?
Right, right.
Yeah.
No, that's exactly right. Um, well, let's talk about testing the waters.
Yeah.
Tell us about what your boy what our boy Louis Hammy,
Louis Hammy.
did at the awards FIA gala.
Oh yeah. This is amazing. The internet's just a gift that just keeps giving. Could you imagine living in a time where we didn't have instant access to information?
I
Right?
know.
Like we
I know.
would we would
It
hear
would
about
be a
this like a week
rumor.
after. I know, right?
Yeah, yeah. People
Like,
be,
oh, I heard, I heard he did this. Yeah.
I heard
But
this happened.
because of like all this nonsense that's been going to FIA in their investigation, Mercedes personnel were not too enthused or pleased. Um, so FIA holds a gala every single year after the end of the season where they pass out the awards, like championship award, second place, third place, rookie of the year, all this kind of stuff, right? And Lewis was third in the drivers' championship this season, so he got the award for third place, and he left the trophy at the gala and gave it to a fan apparently. And
Mm-hmm.
this photo is making its rounds on the internet, and it's very funny. Um, it's just like hilarious to me that he was just like, yeah, no, I don't want this. Like, because it could be one of two things, right? It could be him protesting the investigation into the Wolves from last week, or he's just like, it's a third place trophy, I don't need it. You know what I mean?
Well, I think it was specifically a reference. I mean, because like he criticized the FIA about the handling of the Susie Wolf saga.
Yeah.
He also hammered them with their diversity quotas and the fact that they're not doing as much as they should be doing as far as helping create more diversity in the sport.
Hmm.
And also too, you know what? That trophy is either going to sit in a closet hiding, like collecting dust, or some fan is going to be able to enjoy it. I mean,
Yeah.
like it's like Lewis Hamilton has 7 championships with
Hmm.
how many wins and how many pole.
Yeah.
Oh, like he's got trophies galore. He could probably fill. He would easily be able to fill a house that I can't afford with his trophies. Okay, if we're being honest.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think like he's gonna do what he's gonna do, and you know what, like
Yeah.
I mean, what's FIA gonna do? Are they gonna like fine him for leaving this gift behind? Like,
They'll investigate him.
nobody does that. They're gonna just be like, you just like Secret Santa at work, and you just like leave you leave the gift card to Hobby Lobby that like Karen gave you behind. Like, what is she gonna like come at you? Gonna get fired because you left the gear? Like nothing's gonna, it's what's gonna, they can't, that's not gonna happen.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think like Lewis Hamilton, the one thing that I really admire about Lewis Hamilton is that he knows his platform, and he knows when to and when not to play the game.
Yep.
And therefore he is an incredibly good player. He knows how to play it. And I think this is a moment where he knows his power, he knows his influence, he knows the FIA can't ban him. I mean, he still has a big enough of a fan base, he's a big enough of a person in the sport that they would take a major hit if they let him go before he was ready.
I mean,
so
I would even argue that like between Lewis and any of the drivers on the grid, that Lewis has the biggest fan base by far.
it's probably right. I think like Hamilton fans are comprised of people who are his diehard fans for sure, but also like there are people who like Hamilton by default because it almost feels like it would be wrong not to like Hamilton because he's such a likable person. You know what I mean?
That's a fair point. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, shall we fire up the keyboards, hook up our LAN connection, get out our Texas Instrument calculators.
Oh man.
And just call all the dweebs and just deep dive into our interesting data analysis that we have put together over a few different layouts. So yeah,
absolutely.
let's get it going.
So actually, real quick, as you mentioned Texas Instruments, what were you rocking back in high school?
Oh, I had a Texas Instrument. Yeah.
Do you remember the number? Like, do you have a TI 84? You probably had an 84.
I don't remember. I remember it wasn't very big, but it did have a cover that fancy to me.
I typically have my.
And I do remember like being able to like type words in it was just such a trip for me. Now looking back at it, it's like it's very quaint.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was just like, ooh, like I could put words in this.
Yeah, I had a TI 83, and then I got a TI 84, and I was playing Block Dude all the time on my TI 84. That was the game. Do you remember Block Dude? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. See, kids, this was in the time where we didn't have like a nice, like we didn't have smartphones. Like, I mean, smartphones were out then. Like the first iPhone came out 2008, but it wasn't a commodity like it is now, right? Everyone has them now. Playing Block Dude was one way that you could keep yourself entertained in math class. And then I later upgraded to a TI-89 Silver Edition. So, just pretty cool over here. That's me. Anyways, so yeah, we took a lot of the data from. First off, shout out to statsf1.com, and there's another site that I cannot remember. Your name is, that's me doing a drum roll. I can't find it real quick. I think it's like F1 plug or something like that.
Okay.
But shout out to those entities for pitwall.app.
Right.
And statsf1.com. I switched.
I definitely use statsf1.com for this.
It's so nice. For anyone who likes looking at data and like records and all that kind of stuff, those sites are amazing.
As you will see, there was the one thing they came in clutch is I was trying to find it, I could not find it. It was I was trying to figure out who led the laps this season, right?
Yeah.
But not just who led how many laps, but where they led those laps.
During the race.
During the race, and who led the most, right? And that was data I was able to find through that website, because if you put that in through Google, all it shows you is who won or who led laps and how many, but it didn't tell you where. And so I needed to find out where, because I was trying to allocate points, which I will explain in a little bit. But very, very helpful website.
Yeah, I can imagine you asking Google, like, "Hey Google, who won this race?" Or if you just say, who won a race in Formula One this year? And it just interrupts and he's like, Max Verstappen. Max Verstappen.
Max Verstappen. It's like, shut up, Google. And he just starts playing Max Verstappen. Well, anyway, which data set should we start with, Idris? What one are you
Let's
most?
just.
What's the easy way to ease this into?
I think there's some really fun ones to do just right off the bat. So recently, F1 has reintroduced fastest laps into the sport. That is where if you are finished in the top 10 and you record the fastest lap time during the race, you get an extra point. So we were curious what teams and what drivers had the most fastest laps during the season. So if you had to guess, who do you think won or got the highest number of fastest laps this season, Gabe?
Let me see. Was it Racing Bulls? No.
No.
I think it's somebody that probably has a drink company, energy drink company, and probably has a really hard time. They probably have a racist grandpa hanging out. It's probably a team like that.
Yeah. I think you'd be right. Yeah, so Red Bull, everyone, had the highest number of fastest laps accrued during the season with 11 total. Between that, you had a split of Max Verstappen with 9, Sergio Perez with 2. The team after that had the second highest number was Mercedes with 5.
That was surprising to me.
Yeah, very surprising, right? And the way that breaks down is Louis Hammy, he had 4 of those, and George Russell had 1. What's interesting is that of the 10 teams, you have 1, 2, 3, 4 teams that did not get a single fastest lap during the 2023 season.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and what's a bummer is that Alfa Romeo, their fastest lap was from Zhou Guanyu, but unfortunately he didn't finish in the top 10, so he didn't get any sort of notoriety for that.
Yeah.
Even though it happened.
So realistically, I mean, it's frankly like 5 teams that didn't have a fastest lap that counted, right? Towards the championship.
It's funny too. It's just like because the fastest lap counts for a point now. It has become this thing that like people sort of seek after for just that little extra, because that can mean a lot, especially in the lower and or sort of midfield positions. But yeah, not surprised. RB19 incredibly fast. I was a little surprised. I thought Aston Martin had some more fastest laps in there than they normally did.
Me too.
But I think part of it was probably because they were fighting for position closer to the top, and so they weren't in a position to like jump into the pit lane and then throw on some super soft tires and just bang out a fastest lap. Because that's sometimes that's kind of how it does. Which I don't know. Do you feel like that's kind of cheating a little bit? Where it's like they're low on fuel. Yeah, they're just low on fuel. They're in like, maybe like comfortably in 10th place. And they're just like, let's just throw on some super softs and just bang in a fastest lap. Like, you know what I mean? Like it almost doesn't feel like it's earned. It feels like you're just,
kind of game with gas in the system.
Yeah.
I feel you. Yeah, because it's like, oh man, you did that on your old tires. Like, yeah, you're just looking at purely like the raw performance of the car. I feel that. Right. I feel that. Yeah. Okay, so here's another really fun one, because I think this is a question a lot of people have wondered, like through the duration of this, like crushed, like soul crushing season, like, and when I say soul crushing, it's to the point of like, it must have been really hard to be a driver this season in F1 and just think, I think I might have a chance to win today. I got pole. Right. I might have a shot tomorrow. No, no, baby. Oh, sweet summer child. No.
Sweet summer child.
And so this category is if we took a look at the F1 2023 season with no Max Verstappen, he just gets Thanos, right? Doesn't exist.
Yeah. They found out that he's been taking steroids the whole time.
Ooh.
So they just pull all of his points and his championship away.
Gets deked, right?
Yeah.
So who wins the championship? And okay, I think you've seen this already now, Gabe, but if you had to guess, just based on performance this year, if you had to guess who would win the championship with no Max?
Is it Perez?
It is Perez. It is Perez.
Wow.
Yeah.
You win.
You know what's funny though? I actually thought,
congrats.
Like before looking at this, I actually thought it would have been Lewis. I thought it would have been Lewis or Fernando. The reason, and like Norris was up there, but I was like, I don't know, Norris. The problem is that McLaren did so poorly in the beginning of the season that there's really no chance for them to build up a good lead. But Sergio Perez, like, wins this by like a good amount, actually.
Well,
Yeah,
and what's funny about this is its context, right? Because like, we all think that Perez had such a terrible season only because he keeps being compared to Max. But like
exactly,
by
exactly.
itself, like he had a pretty solid season
A really
considering.
good season.
You know what I
Yeah,
mean? But everyone's just like, oh, well, he's only finishing fifth. I mean, he's just not up to par with
yeah,
Max. It's like, dude, like
yeah,
anybody else, I would have been like, okay,
yeah.
all right. I think the expectations are so high, and I think that's why
Absolutely.
it's it kind of skewed a bit. But
Yeah,
yeah,
and it makes you think too that like I think what sets Max apart from others is his consistency, right? Because the car can be bad, but he can still deliver the points, whether it's a first place finish or if he's getting a fifth place, right? But he's consistently finishing high enough that over the course of the season he can coast with like the remaining 5 or 6 races because he did all the work
right,
up front. Not that he
yeah,
does that because his foot's always like on the gas, but yeah, just shocking. So in this scenario, by the way, the source for this is Motorsports Magazine. We started doing the analysis, and then we saw that Motorsport had already done it. We're like, oh, great, okay. So we'll just give him the shout out for that.
right,
But Checo, he finishes the season with 348 points. Lewis 295. So that's a good 50 plus
It is.
point.
Yeah. And look at Logan Sargent,
gap
4
there.
points.
Yeah, Logan Sargent comes in at 4 points at the bottom. De Vries still zero.
Still
Still zero in this universe, unfortunately. Um, I feel bad. But what's cool about a scenario like this is that you wonder if Max Verstappen just got Thanos, right? Who would be sitting in the seat next to him, right?
That was what I was gonna
Right?
say. Yeah, like
That
what would it have
that
shaken
changed
out
it
if it
up.
was somebody else? Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially if it was somebody new, because obviously Perez he has one other season under his belt, so he would probably be the lead driver.
Yeah.
But yeah, like imagine if it was like Liam Lawson, like what would
Yeah.
he have done? Like would
Maybe.
he have done better? Would he have done
Right.
worse? Like it's always when you're thrown into the deep end in F1, it's like you don't always just land on your feet running. Like
Mhm.
even Max kind of struggled for a little bit before he really kind of got up to speed.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, that's an interesting thought experiment. And also you never know what else could have shook out, like people in different positions, like people hitting people, not hitting people, like the alternative world variables are endless to think about.
Yeah.
But it is something that people were always talking about throughout the whole season, was like, oh, like if Max wasn't here, like we would be having a good title fight. And I'm just like, well, yeah, you could say that about Sebastian Vettel or like Mercedes if they if you didn't have Mercedes and Bottas, like it was the same thing. So
I mean, okay, so 9 times out of 10 I agree with that sentiment, but here I think it really applies because the fact that in this scenario Perez only won by what is that, like just like 50 plus points, that's pretty
that's
ridiculous.
close. That's like
really close.
That's two race wins.
That's 2 race wins, exactly.
Yeah, it makes it much closer than
Yeah.
it would have been before. Very very much so.
Yeah.
I completely agree with that.
Yeah. So Gabe, I know you were really interested in taking a look at the season results with the IndyCar point system applied. What does that look like?
Well, is talking about alternative realities. I had a thought of like what initially I had, and I can mention this too. I initially had this idea of what the F1 season would look like if we had taken into account if the qualifying finishes were counted as race finishes rather than like going ahead and doing the race. And that had some fairly interesting results. Mostly Ferrari is the one that wins out on top. They basically they qualified a lot better than Mercedes, even though Mercedes had a better race finish. And Haas would have been 7th in the Constructors' Championship. McLaren would have gained a lot of points, and AlphaTauri would have beaten out Alfa Romeo if we were just looking at their qualifying. But then I thought to myself, what would have happened if they had used the IndyCar point system? Which, if you're unfamiliar with the IndyCar point system, IndyCar points they give out points from first place all the way down to the last place. It starts at 50 and it trickles down like about 5 or so points going down as you get like it starts to flip once you're at like 14 and 15, It goes 15 points, then 14 points, then 13, 12, 10.
Mm-hmm.
But past 10th place, you're still entitled to points. Okay, so that's
Yeah.
one thing. On top of that, IndyCar awards 1 point if you lead a lap. It awards 2 points if you've led the most laps.
Mm.
And then it awards 1 point if you have pole position. So essentially, if the race finishes 50 points, so an IndyCar driver could potentially walk away with 54 points, which I'm sure Alex Palou did several times this year, because that's pole position, 2 for most laps, 1 for leading a lap, and then obviously like your race finish.
Yeah.
So I decided to go through and take all of the race finishes and apply the points as if those it was the IndyCar point system, and a few interesting things happened. So not much, really nothing happened. Nothing changes in the first 4 places on the grid as far as the constructors and as the drivers. But Leclerc, unfortunately, takes quite a dip. So he drops 2 places and bumps Norris up to 5th and signs up to 6th. Now that's important considering the fact that basically what this is saying is that it's not just if you finish the race or not, but it's your consistency of where you're at finishing position wise, right? Where it really starts to get interesting as we get to the bottom, because in the midfield, Gasly and Stroll swap places. So Stroll finishes 11th and Gasly is 10th. So Gasly basically had a more consistent finishing than Stroll did. But where it really gets interesting is down at the bottom, because basically everybody sort of gets a little bump up, except for Ricciardo. Ricciardo loses out the most. And the reason is because Ricciardo missed quite a few Grand Prix, right? So like he didn't have any of these low finishes. And the thing is that on average, because he was finishing higher with the normal F1 point system, that's why he was able to get, better points, even though on average he finished smaller races. So if we were looking at this system as IndyCar points in F1, Nick de Vries would be up 2 positions. Like he would have 131 points in that system. He would have been 20th place. Ricciardo was in 24th, and then Liam Lawson, unfortunately, would have been in 22nd. Right. And the reason why those guys are down, like I said, is because they didn't participate in all the races, right? Yeah. Sargent would have gained 2. De Vries was up 2, and Magnussen and Zhou Guanyu were all up 1. And Bottas, unfortunately, was knocked down 1 position with the IndyCar finishes. So basically, what this is doing, it's just rewarding the consistency of the drivers, right? It's rewarding like if you finish in 12th and 13th consistently, that's a pretty decent haul of points over somebody that might have a 5th place finish, but then crashes the next 3 Grand Prix. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then as far as the constructors goes, like I said, the first top 6 positions don't change, but at the bottom, Williams drops from all the way down to the bottom. And that is because of Logan Sargent basically, continuing to kind of putter at the bottom while Albon is sort of kicking up at the top, right?
Right.
I'm also surprised that Aston Martin didn't move, because I was expecting it to, with Lance Stroll compared to Fernando Alonso's finishing positions, but no, the way the math worked out is that it stayed the same. So I think that from this analysis is that I wish F1 would take on the similar IndyCar system. Yeah. Because it would make all of the battles in the midfield and lower that much more important and that much more interesting. It would also incentivize drivers to stay out on track, even though their car is compromised and they're pretty slow. So long as they're not posing a safety hazard, they could still compete to try and get points to finish the race with. Yeah. Yeah. And you know what I mean? Yeah.
No, that's what I'm seeing from this too, that you're getting the steady state performance over the duration of the season, right? Like, yeah, maybe you got a 2nd place finish early on, but consistently you finish P9, P10. You're probably going to be somewhere closer to P9, P10, right? That P2 can only do so much for you, right? It kind of gives you your real raw average, and that's a really, really good set of data here.
And
I don't know why we don't use IndyCar point system here in F1.
No, And can I just say that Verstappen finishes in the IndyCar point system with 1,130 points, which is 447 points more than Sergio Perez. So, like,
But it points to
damn, my
consistency,
dude.
right? It points to consistency.
Well, he just got so much extra points because he
Yeah.
would lead most laps and have most pole positions,
Yeah.
right? So, like, I think it's like that, you know, I think maybe that's the argument, is that they're worried that if somebody runs away with it, they really run away with it. But
But I mean,
at the
does it
same
matter?
time,
Like,
it doesn't matter. I think it
yeah.
gives more agency to the midfield, and that's why I like it.
I think what's cool about this too is that it looks at so many different facets of your racecraft, right? Like whether or not the team can give you a good car, whether or not it's reliable, whether or not you can lead laps with the car, whether or not, you know, how do you finish, like points position wise, where do you finish, just things like that, right? And it makes the team kind of want to push towards just being a better entity at
Yeah.
large, right? Maybe like that's why in IndyCar we went to Mid Ohio, right? We were sitting there and we saw Marcus Ericsson just go off the road. We're like, oh, he's done. But they got his car started back up. He went back out, right? That wouldn't happen in F1 because there's no reason to. There's no incentive to, right?
Right.
So
Right.
think about this. You go to Spa. You want to see your favorite driver out on the track. And then, some kind of incident happens.
Yep.
They just into the pit, into the box. That's it, right?
And that's it. Yeah.
That
And then
sucks. You paid all
stop.
this money to go to Spa, you know?
Right, right. Well, and also, I mean, yeah, it like gives the drivers chance to continue to drive.
Yeah.
And it also gives the teams the chance to sort of probably collect, you know, probably relatively limited data, but you never know what you could learn from a compromised car that's running. Like
Yeah.
maybe some other part of the car suddenly works more efficiently, and you suddenly realize like, oh, like we could change this around and maybe you make it work better. So like there's always that potential. And so I think my view is like I want to see more teams on track, and I want their battles to be worth more. Like I want them to have more value. So I definitely think F1 should consider some sort of way of changing, because historically it has always been the first 10 positions get points, except I think in the 50s I think it was only the first 6, but
Which
yeah,
is even
I
worse.
think it's, which is even worse. Yeah, I think it's a better system. I want
Yeah.
it because I think it would make a difference in the midfield battle, and I think it would make us care more about who finishes below 10th than we do currently. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that doesn't say people don't care now. There are people who are very invested in the what's called the Formula 1.5, right? Championship battle, like the best of the rest, right? But
right,
it gives even more credence to that. So
right.
excellent.
Yep.
I got a fun one here for you. There
Okay.
was as I was sitting down looking at these numbers, especially just the points haul that Max had, I was wondering, you have 3 champions on the grid, right? What does their point total look like versus the rest of the grid, right? And yeah, the information on that is wild. Here, let me just grab that. There we go. Cool. Sorry, my data got all mixed up here. So yeah, here. All right. So if we take a look at all the points that the champions got on the grid, you have Max Verstappen with 575 points. You have Lewis Hamilton with 234 and Fernando Alonso with 206. So you sum that up, you get 1,015 points. The rest of the grid altogether, you get 1,443. Now, using those two numbers, you can come up with 2 values here. If you take a look at the number of points that Max Verstappen, Lewis Hamilton, and Fernando Alonso combined to have, they have 70% of the points of the rest of the grid combined, which is just like what? That shows that these guys are on monster teams. Like they are on teams that are able to give them cars that deliver. Even like the Mercedes with its awful zero pod, or wait, I'm sorry, it's not exactly zero pod, but it's also not a black Red Bull.
It's the blobfish pod.
Yeah, that's insane. That's an insane point haul. And yeah, while
It is, yeah.
while Max is carrying the lion's share of this, right? You look at the point breakdown, Lewis and Fernando are accumulating for just about half of that. So, you know, it's a pretty good haul here. Now, the other interesting number you can pull out of this is that you look at those 3 again, Verstappen, Hamilton, Alonso, of the available points of the entire championship, right? Those 3 together accumulated 41% of all those points. So I think that number is even crazier to think about, just because that, I mean, they're just sucking everything up. 3 people hold 41% of the points of the
that's
available in the
wild.
championship. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, what can you really do with that number? I mean, it's just more so just kind of pointing out the ridiculousness of Max's just haul, right, and his consistency. But wow.
Well, it also goes to show, like, even with compromised equipment, like Hamilton and Alonso are still capable of creating, using all of that experience that they've had previously to create results, which is funny because it's something that everybody always expected Kimi Räikkönen to be doing. But I don't think he ever really pulled like a huge amount of stellar. Like, he had one win with like Lotus, but like, you know what I mean? Like, he didn't shock or like surprise everybody like I think he was going to, or he was expecting to. And I think maybe he was just kind of like, yeah, whatever, like I'll do it. But he just, he did that, like he did like, get almost bankrupt Sauber by like, getting, or was it Sauber? Maybe it was Lotus F1, where he was just like getting a bunch of podiums, and like he would get bonus money for every podium that he got.
I think it's Lotus.
Like, so like he did like, he knew what he was doing, but I think it's just the perception was that like Raikkonen was going to come in and like win more championships and just be a dynamo, but he just didn't 100% translate. So I'm thinking like that's why I think the Alonso podiums were so exciting, because you just were not expecting that he was going to be able to, keep up with the young kids, but he has. So good for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. And I think this brings us to our last 2 charts that we compiled here. They're interrelated, and so we're going to kind of talk about them together because it makes sense that way. But what we did, we took a look at the points per race weekend on a driver basis and on a team basis. And we did this for a couple of reasons. Number one, just to look at consistency of drivers, right? And also to see trends with the teams, just to see when teams started taking off, when they started falling off a cliff. Because it happened. But yeah, it's really fun to look at it this way. So you can imagine we have our plot that shows like the number of points available per weekend, and then we have just all the races listed out on the bottom. So it's just a moving scatter plot here, right? Or moving line here. Clearly Max Verstappen is at the top. for most weekends. He's just right there. And I wish I could show you guys what we're looking at, but you just have like a purple squiggle. We chose purple for Red Bull. Just makes sense, right? Because they threw a little bit of purple on their car for the
they should
Vegas
be purple.
livery.
I missed that. Was like,
I feel like a nice pearlescent purple would be really nice with them.
Yeah, just like the Vettel era, like 2013. Like that was the livery, man.
Yeah, it'd be clean.
Yeah. It's funny talking about consistency. I love how Alonso's first 4 races are just a straight line.
Yeah.
It's just like, no dips.
Then he goes up, and then he goes off a cliff for a while.
Hit her down for a while. Yeah. I have also noticing that the orange pretty much stays down below until you hit Austria, and then also it's just bing, like just shoot way up.
Yep.
And you start to see that orange kind of come into play again.
Mm-hmm.
So that's McLaren. McLaren started off a pretty lowly season starting, and then they just picked up their pace again. It looks like the Ocon had like one little like reasonable peak at the beginning of the year, but had pretty much stayed fairly low. So it's like a lot of this is just like kind of, as it's funny to see it in sort of displayed out this way.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely,
to really get a sense of like kind of how all of this played out over the course of the season.
Yeah, what's fascinating about when you look at it on a points per race weekend on a constructor basis is McLaren, for sure takes off. But I think McLaren had for our dweebs, nerds, and casuals out there, had the highest slope, right? So that is the highest rise in the trend line here versus any other team, which just shows that they really took off at a certain point. Just like Gabe was saying, like they kind of showed up, made their mark at Austria, but then fell off in they had a low point of Monza, and then from there it was just up. And they came down again with some issues with the cars, that sort of thing. But if you look at some of the teams that just really made no noise, I mean, you've got Williams, You've got Haas, you've got Alfa Romeo. I mean, and they're just at the bottom. It's like really sad to see. I think what this chart, when you take a look at points per race weekend on a constructor basis, it shows you the value of being on a big team, right? Like you see Red Bull is high up, you see Mercedes is high up, you see Aston Martin is high up, Ferrari is high up, even though they've been wild. Like Ferrari is just like, their chart is just like Mountain Valley, Mountain Valley, Mountain Valley, Mountain Valley. Like,
yeah. Well, it's like Ferraris is all over the place, man.
Yeah, and
like they're scattered brained.
Yeah, like every peak. I think that's I just imagine that's Carlos going singing Smooth Operator, and then the valley is just Charles going no.
Honestly, I would say if we were to do this artistically, I would say that Sainz probably actually makes the most aesthetically pleasing mountain range. If we're looking at this as like a mountain range, Max is just like Max looks like a side like a it looks like a skyline for like a cyberpunk city. And like
it does.
Perez is yeah, it's okay. Fernando's is really strange. That just with that straight line at the end, but like Ferrari has like these perfectly balanced and spaced peaks and valleys. That would make a pretty good mountain range if you were to just plot that out on a piece of paper. So, wild. There's some wild stuff in there.
Yeah. No, this is really fun to do, and I think Gabe and I, we plan on doing this for more seasons, whether it's F1 or IndyCar, NASCAR, whatever it is, because looking at driver performance and team performance is really fun because it gives you a lot of insight into how what's going on. Are there trends going on that maybe need to be investigated further, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But this also just shows you too, just consistency. I think we've talked about consistency with every plot we've brought up here today, and I think this one really tells the story the most. Really, the points per race weekend on a driver basis. If you keep finishing really high, you're going to get a lot of points, and your average is going to be nice and high, and it also affects how your team is doing. So
right.
That's
the thing. I think that's the thing. I think consistency, like you said, is the key. And like if we had used the IndyCar point system, the consistency would be rewarded. And I think it's potential that like you could have a team and a driver who ends up winning the championship maybe is on the podium a couple of times but doesn't win a race but is always consistently on the podium, and then like you have a driver who gets like 2 or 3 wins in the season, but then it's just like DNF the rest of the time.
Dude,
you know what I mean? So it's just like you can have spectacular drives, but you need to be consistent with it. And I think that's really the big takeaway. It's I think like even in an era of Max's dominance, it's interesting to see how consistency would benefit people and teams
behind him
in the midfield. It's just like their incentive to just get all the way up in the top, even though like they would have a better season if there were more points to be allotted to them. So, you know what I mean?
Yeah. One thing real quick I wanted to say about looking at this data, it's funny that Gasly is finishing better than Ocon in almost every scenario. Ocon is supposed to be the lead driver, right?
Right. I mean, he finished above him in Saudi Arabia, but and Ocon was above Gasly in Monaco, but other than that, yeah. I think, honestly, good for Pierre. I feel like I want to see more from Alpine next year. We really did not see much from them this year, so hopefully something will happen. Ocon said something about he's going into war mode next year, which is like, okay, ST, bestie. That's fine.
What does that mean?
I have no idea. I don't know what going into war mode means. He probably just means like, he's going to come out swinging or whatever. There would be a more eloquent way of saying what he was trying to imply, but he just said he came war mode is what he said. So
Je vais à la guerre.
And he just crashes into somebody at the first turn. He's like, war mode! Nah! I told you I go for a gap. That was the grass, man. It exists. He just yeets himself into whoever.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, I don't want to see anybody hurt, but like I kind of want to see Max like hit the wall and be embarrassed because he messed up. you know, because like he's just been on like his
On
own
fire.
like
Yeah.
on fire, just all the way up at the top, no mistakes, you know, for a year. And I want to see the going outside him, just start freaking out and screaming at his dad, you know. You did this, Dad. Anyway, well, everybody, thank you for listening to this episode, this data heavy episode of F1 or F off. You can find us anywhere you listen to your podcasts. If you want to hit us up, you can follow us on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and Twitter, and Threads, wherever else you want to get your F1 or F off content. Please email us at F1 or F off podcast@gmail.com. Give us a 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you give us a good review, we will definitely read it on the pod. We want to, you know, kind of pat ourselves on the shoulder with other people's words, because that's what you do when you run a podcast. But yeah, you know, yeah, thanks for everybody. We're excited for what's to come the rest of this winter. But yeah, I think
follow our socials.
Follow our socials, see what we're doing. Keep us posted. Ask us questions. We'll always answer them.
Bless up.
Yes, right. That.
Those you can't see, but I
Bussin',
did
no
the
cap,
bless.
for real.
I did the bless up hands.
For real. Bussin'.
That'd be a good sticker.